Imagine a universe where the most powerful galactic empire has existed for over 10,000 years, crushing civilizations with the casual ease of stepping on insects. Their fleets number in the millions, their technology seems godlike, and their reach extends across entire galactic arms. Every species that has ever dared to resist them has been reduced to cosmic dust within days. But what happens when this unstoppable force encounters something they never accounted for? What happens when the Empire's most routine border patrol picks up a signal from a small, unremarkable blue planet in an insignificant spiral arm? A planet whose inhabitants have been watching, learning, and preparing for over 2 centuries. The Draknari Empire is about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you never bothered to notice. Sometimes the greatest threat comes not from advanced technology or superior numbers, but from something far more terrifying: the relentless, ingenious fury of a species that refuses to kneel. This is the story of how humanity's first contact with the galactic empire became the Empire's last mistake. This is the story of how an overlooked border signal became the beginning of the end for those who thought themselves untouchable. The universe is about to learn why you should never underestimate a species that learned to split atoms before they learned to leave their own planet. Commander Vexai of the Draknari Imperial Fleet scratched his scaled chin as he studied the readings on his command console. 23 years of service had taught him that routine border patrols in Sector 7739 were supposed to be exactly that. The Outer Rim territories held nothing but primitive worlds barely capable of radio transmission, if they had achieved even that level of technology. Yet here he was, staring at sensor data that made no sense. "Sensor Operator Keth," he called across the bridge of the Dreadnought Eternal Dominion. "Run those scans again. Your equipment must be malfunctioning." The young Draknari female manipulated her controls with practiced efficiency. Her reptilian features remained impassive, but Vexai could sense her confusion. "Sir, I've run the diagnostics 3 times. All systems are functioning within normal parameters." "Then explain to me how a Class 5 primitive world is generating directed energy signatures that register as Class D3 technology," Vexai said, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came with commanding one of the Empire's kilometer-long warships. The bridge fell silent except for the ambient hum of the ship's massive fusion reactors. The Eternal Dominion was one of 300 vessels assigned to patrol the Empire's outer borders, a mobile fortress capable of sterilizing entire worlds. Its crew of 1,500 had never encountered anything that required more than a single demonstration of their plasma cannons to ensure compliance. "Perhaps," offered Navigation Officer Therex from his station, "the primitives have discovered some naturally occurring phenomenon that mimics directed energy patterns." Vexai considered this. The Empire's database contained records of unusual mineral formations and cosmic anomalies that could sometimes fool sensors. But what he was seeing looked too organized, too purposeful. The energy signatures were coming from multiple points across the planet's surface in what appeared to be a coordinated pattern. "Bring us to standard observation distance," he ordered, "and prepare a communication probe. If these primitives have somehow developed beyond their classification, we need to determine whether they require immediate subjugation or simple monitoring." The massive ship adjusted its course toward the 3rd planet in the system, a blue-green world that the Empire's scouts had cataloged 2 centuries ago as harboring primitive organic life. According to the files, the dominant species had barely achieved powered flight at the time of the survey. They were scheduled for another evaluation in another 300 years, well within the Empire's standard protocols for monitoring developing civilizations. As they approached, the sensor readings became even more puzzling. The planet's electromagnetic spectrum was buzzing with activity. Radio waves, microwave transmissions, and what appeared to be some form of digital communication network blanketed the entire world. Either the primitives had experienced an impossible acceleration in their development, or something else entirely was happening. "Commander," Sensor Operator Keth called out, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty that was rare among the Imperial military. "I'm detecting artificial structures in orbit around the planet." Vex's head snapped up from his tactical display. Impossible! The survey report shows no spacefaring capability. Sir, the structures appear to be some form of habitat stations. Multiple units connected by what looks like transportation tubes. And, Commander, she paused, double-checking her readings. I'm detecting movement patterns consistent with active population centers. The bridge crew exchanged glances. In the Empire's 10,000-year history, they have never encountered a species that had advanced from primitive flight to orbital habitation in such a short time span. Most civilizations required at least a millennium to make that transition, and even then, only under ideal circumstances.
Visual confirmation, Vex-High ordered.
I want to see what we're dealing with. The main viewing screen flickered to life, displaying a magnified image of the space around the planet. What they saw challenged everything they thought they knew about technological development. Massive cylindrical structures rotated slowly in stable orbits, their surfaces gleaming with what appeared to be advanced metallurgy. Smaller craft moved between the stations with purpose and precision, following established traffic patterns that suggested a mature space-based civilization. But it was what hung beyond the orbital stations that truly caught their attention. Positioned at strategic points around the planet's gravity well were structures that even the Draknari recognized as potentially threatening. They were clearly artificial, too geometric to be natural phenomena, and they were all pointed outward towards space. Weapons platforms, whispered Tactical Officer Renth, his usually confident demeanor shaken. Those are weapons platforms. Vex-High studied the structures more carefully. His tactical training recognized the signs: reinforced construction, energy conduits leading to what appeared to be focusing arrays, and positioning that provided optimal coverage of all approach vectors. These primitives hadn't just achieved spaceflight, they had militarized their orbital space with the efficiency of a species that expected trouble. "How many platforms?" he asked. Keth worked furiously at her console. Initial count shows 47 major installations with smaller supporting structures. Commander, some of these installations appear to be significant in scale. On the screen, one of the weapons platforms became visible in detail as their sensors focused on it. The structure was easily the size of a Draknari battlecruiser, its surface bristling with arrays and projectors that served no purpose other than to project its destructive energy across vast distances. Whatever species had built this had clearly prioritized defensive capabilities. "Have they detected us?" Vex-High asked. "Unknown, sir. We're still at extreme sensor range, but their technology appears more sophisticated than our initial assessment suggested. It's possible they have detection capabilities we haven't accounted for." As if summoned by her words, the communication station suddenly came alive with activity. Communications Officer Zeph straightened in his chair, his expression shifting from boredom to alert attention. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the planet." "Impossible. We haven't announced our presence." "Nevertheless, sir, we are receiving a directed communication on Imperial Standard frequencies. The transmission appears to be originating from the planet's surface." The implications hit everyone on the bridge simultaneously. For the primitives to be broadcasting on Imperial frequencies meant one of two things. Either they had somehow intercepted and decoded Imperial communications, or they had been monitoring Imperial transmissions for an extended period. Both possibilities were deeply troubling. "Put it through," Vex-High commanded. The bridge speakers crackled to life, and a voice began speaking in accented but perfectly understandable Imperial standard. "Draknari vessel Eternal Dominion, this is Earth Defense Command. You have entered the territorial space of the Sol System. Please state your intentions and prepare to receive navigation instructions for safe passage through our defensive perimeter." The silence that followed was deafening. Not only had the primitives detected them, they had identified their ship by name and were treating the encounter as if they were the ones in control of the situation. More disturbing still was the casual mention of a defensive perimeter, as if they expected their weapons to be effective against Imperial technology. Vex-High found his voice after several moments. "Response options? Tactical?" Rent consulted his displays with the mechanical precision of a career military officer. "Standard protocol would be to demand immediate surrender and compliance. However, sir," their defensive installations appear to be non-standard. I recommend caution until we have a better assessment of their capabilities. Commander, Kath interrupted. I'm detecting additional energy signatures. Multiple vessels are launching from the orbital stations. Configuration unknown, but they're moving to intercept our position. On the screen, dozens of smaller craft could be seen separating from the various orbital installations. Unlike the crude chemical rockets that primitive species typically used for space travel, these vessels moved with the controlled precision of mature reaction drive technology. They formed up in what was clearly a practiced military formation, positioning themselves between the Draknari ship and the planet. Analysis of the approaching vessels, Vexahe requested. Preliminary scans suggest advanced propulsion systems, possibly fusion-based. Multiple energy signatures consistent with defensive shielding and what appear to be weapon systems. Sir, these are not primitive craft. Someone has been significantly underestimating this species' development. The communication channel opened again and the same voice spoke with calm authority. Draknari Commander, you have 60 seconds to respond to our request for identification and intentions. After that time, we will assume hostile intent and respond accordingly. Vex High felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't experienced in decades of Imperial service. Uncertainty. Everything about this encounter violated established patterns. Primitive species were supposed to either worship Imperial vessels as gods or flee in terror. They were not supposed to issue ultimatums to the forces of the Draknari Empire. Sir, Communications Officer Zeph reported, I'm detecting significant communication traffic between the planet and the approaching vessels. They appear to be coordinating their response through some form of instantaneous communication network. Vex Hay repeated, Dick P. Even the Empire struggled with faster-than-light communication across interstellar distances. The technology existed, but it was complex and expensive. For a supposedly primitive species to have developed it suggested a level of advancement that challenged fundamental assumptions. The approaching vessels had closed to within weapons range, though they maintained a respectful distance. Vexahe could see that they were indeed sophisticated machines, their hulls bearing the scars and modifications that spoke of actual combat experience. These were not parade craft or exploration vessels. They were warships designed and built by a species that understood the realities of space combat. Commander Tactical Officer Renth said quietly, recommend we respond to their communication. If they have developed effective space-based weapons, engaging them without understanding their full capabilities could result in unnecessary damage to Imperial assets. It was a careful way of saying that they might actually be in danger, something that was almost unthinkable for a crew that had spent their careers demonstrating Imperial superiority to inferior species. Vexahe made his decision, open a channel. The communication system activated, and he spoke with the measured authority that had served him throughout his career. This is Commander Vexahe of the Imperial Draknari Fleet. You will stand down your vessels and prepare to receive Imperial representatives for standard compliance evaluation. The response came back immediately, delivered in the same calm tone that somehow managed to be both respectful and utterly unyielding. Commander Vexahe, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force. Your vessel is trespassing in sovereign human territory. You will withdraw beyond our territorial boundary and request permission for peaceful passage if you wish to continue through this system.
Any attempt to approach our worlds or orbital installations without permission will be considered an act of war.
The words hung in the air like a physical presence. In 10,000 years of imperial expansion, no primitive species had ever spoken to the Draknari Empire with such casual defiance. The crew of the Eternal Dominion sat in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what they had just heard. These humans, as they called themselves, were not simply defending their world. They were claiming sovereignty over their entire star system and treating the Imperial fleet as equals to be negotiated with rather than subjects to be conquered. Sir, whispered Navigation Officer Therex, what are your orders? Vexahe stared at the tactical display, watching the human vessels maintain their formation with professional precision. His training told him to assert Imperial dominance immediately and overwhelmingly. But his experience warned him that he was facing something unprecedented, and unprecedented situations required unprecedented caution. "Maintain position," he finally ordered. "I need to consider our options." For the first time in his career, Commander Bexkai found himself wondering whether the Draknari Empire might have finally encountered something it wasn't prepared to handle. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of Luna Station, watching the tactical displays with the calm intensity that had made her one of Earth's most respected military leaders. The Draknari vessel hung motionless in space, a kilometer-long monument to imperial arrogance that had just received its first lesson in human resolve. "Status report," she requested from her operations officer. "The Draknari ship is maintaining position at 15 million kilometers. No movement toward our defensive perimeter, but their sensors are conducting intensive scans of our installations. Our intercept squadron is holding formation at optimal engagement distance." Chen nodded, her eyes never leaving the massive alien ship on the display. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for over 200 years, ever since the first detection of Draknari scout ships in the outer system. The Empire thought their survey had gone unnoticed, but human ingenuity had turned that assumption into their first strategic advantage. "What's the assessment from our technical analysis teams?" she asked. Dr. Hub, James Redfern, the station's chief science officer, approached with a tablet full of sensor data. "Their ship is impressive by conventional standards. Fusion-based propulsion, plasma weapon systems, and what appears to be some form of energy shielding. But Admiral, there's nothing in their technology profile that we haven't already accounted for in our defensive planning." This was the crucial intelligence that had shaped human strategy for 2 centuries. When the first Draknari scouts had arrived, humanity had been barely capable of orbital flight, but they had possessed something the Empire had never encountered: the ability to recognize a superior force and the determination to close the technological gap through sheer innovation and preparation. The early years had been desperate ones. Every radio signal, every piece of electromagnetic emission from the Draknari scouts had been captured, analyzed, and reverse-engineered. Humanity's greatest minds had worked in secret installations across the Earth and throughout the growing orbital infrastructure, racing to develop technologies that could match or exceed Imperial capabilities. "Have we intercepted any communications from their ship to Imperial Command?" Chen asked. "Negative. They appear to be maintaining communication silence, which suggests they're as surprised by our capabilities as we hoped they would be." This was exactly what humanity had planned for. The Draknari Empire's greatest weakness was its own success. 10,000 years of unchallenged dominance had made them predictable. They expected primitive species to react with either worship or terror, not calm defiance backed by advanced technology. "Admiral," called out communications specialist Rodriguez from his station, "we're receiving a request for clarification from Captain Morrison aboard the Defiance. He wants to know our rules of engagement if the Draknari attempt to approach the inner system." Chen considered the question carefully. The human fleet consisted of 47 major warships, each one designed and built specifically to fight Imperial vessels. Unlike the Draknari, who built their ships for intimidation and overwhelming force projection, human vessels were built for efficiency and lethality. Every ton of mass, every erg of energy was focused on destroying enemies who outmassed them by orders of magnitude. "Tell Captain Morrison that any unauthorized approach within 10 million kilometers of Earth constitutes an immediate threat to human civilian population centers. He is authorized to engage with full force." The words carried weight that only the human command staff truly understood. Earth's population now exceeded 12 billion souls, with another 8 billion living throughout the orbital habitats and lunar colonies. Every human installation, from the smallest research station to the massive orbital cities, had been designed with the possibility of Imperial attack in mind. More importantly, every human citizen understood exactly what they were facing. Unlike the conquered species of the Empire, who had been surprised by Draknari expansion, humanity had known what was coming for 2 centuries. They had planned for it, prepared for it, and built their entire civilization around the goal of surviving and defeating Imperial aggression. "Dr. Redfern," Chen said, "what's our current assessment of Imperial fleet strength in this sector?"
The scientist consulted his data tablet.
Long-range sensors indicate this is an isolated patrol vessel, no supporting ships within 50 light-years. The nearest Imperial fleet concentration is at their regional command base, approximately 400 light-years toward galactic core. Response time, if they call for reinforcements, minimum of 6 weeks using their fastest courier ships. However, Admiral, there's something else you should know. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected unusual movement patterns in Imperial shipping over the past month. Multiple fleet concentrations have been repositioned away from this sector. Chen felt a chill of recognition. Show me the analysis. The main display switched to a strategic view of known Imperial positions. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Over the past several weeks, Imperial forces had been gradually repositioning themselves, leaving Sector 7739 with minimal coverage. It could be coincidence, Dr. Redfern offered, but the pattern is consistent with what our intelligence projections suggested would happen if the Empire were preparing for a major operation elsewhere.
Or, Shen said grimly, they preparing to make an example of us.
The possibility had been discussed in human strategic planning for decades. The Empire's standard response to unexpected resistance was overwhelming force. If word of human capabilities reached Imperial command, the response would likely be a fleet large enough to sterilize the entire solar system. Recommendations? Chen asked her command staff. Her tactical officer, Colonel Jiang, spoke up first. If we're going to act, we need to act now. That ship represents our only opportunity to engage Imperial forces on anything approaching equal terms. If they escape and report our capabilities, the next force we face will be 10 times larger. Concur, added Captain Torres from the Strategic Planning Division. Our entire defensive strategy is built on the assumption that we can control the flow of information about human capabilities. If the Empire learns what we've accomplished, they'll adjust their approach accordingly. The Draknari vessel was clearly sophisticated and powerful, but it was also alone and apparently unaware of the true scope of human preparation. In many ways, it represented the perfect test case for human military technology. Admiral, Communications Specialist Rodriguez called out, "We're receiving another transmission from the Draknari vessel." "Put it through." Commander Vexhi's voice came through the speakers with measured authority. "Admiral Chen, I am prepared to discuss the terms of your compliance with Imperial sovereignty. However, I must inform you that resistance to Imperial authority carries severe consequences for your species." Chen smiled grimly. The Draknari commander was still operating under the assumption that he held the superior position. It was time to correct that misunderstanding. "Colonel Zhang, signal Captain Morrison. Tell him to execute Demonstration Protocol Alpha." "Yes, ma'am." On the tactical display, one of the human vessels broke formation and accelerated toward a position well away from both the Draknari ship and human installations. The ship, a destroyer-class vessel named Vindication, positioned itself next to a small asteroid that had been placed in high solar orbit for exactly this purpose. "Open channel to the Draknari vessel," Chen ordered. When the connection was established, she spoke with calm professionalism. "Commander Vexhi, you have made certain assumptions about human capabilities based on outdated information. We would like to correct those assumptions before our conversation continues." On the display, the Vindication aligned itself with the asteroid and activated its primary weapon system. What emerged from the human ship was not the crude chemical explosive or primitive nuclear device that Imperial intelligence would have predicted. Instead, a focused beam of coherent energy struck the asteroid with pinpoint precision. The result was spectacular and immediate. The entire asteroid, roughly 5 kilometers in diameter, simply ceased to exist. In less than 2 seconds, several billion tons of rock and metal were converted into an expanding cloud of superheated plasma that glowed like a miniature star. "Weapons analysis?" Chen requested quietly. "Directed antimatter beam, approximately 47% conversion efficiency," Dr. Redfern reported. "Total energy release equivalent to approximately 200 megatons TNT equivalent, delivered in controlled burst lasting 1.7 seconds. On the communication channel, there was absolute silence from the Draknari vessel. Chen allowed the silence to continue for several moments before speaking again. Commander Vex-High, the weapon you just observed represents our standard destroyer-class armament. Our larger vessels carry proportionally more powerful systems. Perhaps we should discuss the terms of your withdrawal from human space. The response, when it came, carried considerably less certainty than before. Admiral Chen, that was an impressive demonstration. However, you should understand that the Draknari Empire has extensive experience dealing with hostile alien technologies. I'm sure you do, Chen replied. However, you should understand that we have extensive experience dealing with Imperial technologies as well. For instance, we know that your ship's shielding system operates on rotational frequency modulation at approximately 47 terahertz. We know that your main plasma cannons require a 3-second charging cycle between shots. And we know that your ship's reactor core becomes vulnerable to cascade failure if subjected to precisely modulated antimatter bombardment. Another long silence from the Draknari ship. Dr. Redfern leaned close to Chen's ear and whispered, "Admiral, their sensor activity just increased dramatically. They're conducting intensive scans of all our vessels." "Let them look," Chen replied quietly. "They won't find anything they can understand in the time they have available." This was another key element of human strategy. Every human vessel had been designed from the ground up to confuse Imperial sensors. Their hulls incorporated advanced metamaterials that could selectively absorb or reflect different scanning frequencies. Their internal systems were shielded and compartmentalized in ways that made detailed analysis extremely difficult. More importantly, human vessels incorporated technologies that the Empire had never encountered. 2 centuries of desperate innovation had led humanity down technological paths that Imperial science had never explored. Antimatter manipulation, quantum entanglement communication, and gravitational field generators were all human innovations that had no Imperial equivalent. "Commander," Chen said, reopening the channel, "you have 2 choices. You can withdraw from human space immediately and report to your superiors that you encountered a civilization that prefers peaceful coexistence but is prepared to defend itself. Or you can attempt to assert Imperial authority and discover exactly how effective your weapons and defenses are against human military technology." Vex-High's voice carried shocked disbelief. "Commander, we are not threatening you. We are informing you of the consequences of your choices. If you choose to leave peacefully, you will be escorted to the edge of our territorial space and released unharmed. If you choose to engage in hostilities, your ship will be destroyed with all hands and we will prepare to defend ourselves against whatever response the Empire chooses to send." Chen signaled to Colonel Zhang, who activated a secondary display showing the full scope of human defensive installations. The view revealed the truth that had been hidden from Imperial intelligence for 2 centuries. Humanity had militarized not just Earth's orbital space. Hidden within the asteroid belt were massive weapons platforms capable of engaging entire fleets. The outer planets hosted defensive stations that could coordinate attacks across light years of space. And scattered throughout the system were the crown jewels of human military engineering. Automated defense systems capable of operating independently for years without human intervention. "As you can see," Chen continued, "we have had considerable time to prepare for this encounter. Your empire has ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years by convincing inferior species that resistance is futile. We are here to inform you that humanity does not consider itself inferior, and we do not consider resistance futile." The communication channel remained open, but no response came from the Draknari vessel. Chen looked around her command center at the faces of men and women who had dedicated their lives to this moment. Every human in space, every person on Earth, every soul in the orbital cities understood that the next few minutes would determine whether humanity would take its place as a free species among the stars or be reduced to cosmic dust like so many civilizations before them. "Signal all stations," she ordered. "Prepare for Imperial response. This is only the beginning." Commander Vex-High stared at the tactical displays in stunned silence, his scaled hands gripping the command chair's armrests with enough force to leave permanent indentations. The asteroid that had existed moments before was now nothing but rapidly cooling plasma. and the implications of what he had just witnessed were rewriting everything he thought he knew about warfare in space. "Tactical analysis," he demanded, his voice strained with an emotion he barely recognized as fear. Tactical Officer Renth worked frantically at his console, running and rerunning the sensor data from the human weapon demonstration. "Sir, initial analysis suggests a directed antimatter stream with near-perfect matter conversion efficiency. The energy release was beyond our current technological capabilities." "Impossible," Bexhai said automatically, though even he could hear the lack of conviction in his voice. "Antimatter weaponization requires containment technologies that take millennia to develop safely. Nevertheless, sir, the energy signature is unmistakable. The humans appear to have achieved stable antimatter manipulation and weaponized it for ship-to-ship combat." The bridge fell silent except for the constant hum of the ship's systems. Every member of the crew was processing the same terrible realization. They were facing a species that had somehow developed weapons technology that exceeded Imperial capabilities. In 10,000 years of expansion, such a thing had never occurred. "Sir," Communications Officer Zeph called out, his voice carrying a note of urgency, "I'm detecting multiple communication bursts from the human vessels. They appear to be coordinating through some form of instantaneous communication network. Analysis? The communication method is unknown, sir. The signals show no propagation delay regardless of distance between vessels, which suggests either faster-than-light transmission or some form of quantum entanglement communication." Bexhai felt his confidence crumbling further. Quantum entanglement communication was theoretical even for Imperial scientists. The energy requirements and technical complexity made it essentially impossible for shipboard use. Yet these humans appeared to be using it as casually as the Empire used radio communication. "Sensor Operator Keth," he called, "what additional intelligence can you provide about human fleet capabilities?" The young female worked with desperate intensity, trying to penetrate the confusing maze of human technology. "Sir, their vessels are unusual. The hull configurations don't match any known design principles. They appear to be optimized for maximum weapon effectiveness rather than intimidation or multi-role capability." "Explain." "Imperial ships are designed to serve as symbols of power as well as weapons of war. These human vessels appear to have been built solely for combat effectiveness. Every design element seems focused on destroying enemy ships with maximum efficiency." Bexhai studied the human fleet formation on his display. Now that Keth had pointed it out, the difference was obvious. Imperial ships were built to inspire awe and terror, their massive size and imposing appearance serving as psychological weapons as much as their actual armaments. The human ships, by contrast, were lean and purposeful, their every line speaking of lethal efficiency. "Sir," Navigation Officer Therek spoke up hesitantly, "I've been analyzing the defensive installations around the human homeworld. The positioning suggests they've been studying Imperial ship movements and designing their defenses specifically to counter our tactical approaches." "Show me." The main display shifted to show a three-dimensional map of human space. What it revealed was a defensive network of stunning sophistication. The weapons platforms weren't randomly positioned. They were placed to create overlapping fields of fire that would force any attacking fleet into predetermined approach vectors, where they could be engaged with maximum effectiveness. "This level of defensive planning requires extensive knowledge of Imperial tactics," Bexhai observed grimly. "How could they possibly have acquired such intelligence?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Yalland, the ship's science officer who rarely spoke during tactical discussions, approached the command chair with obvious reluctance. "Commander, I've been analyzing the communication frequencies the humans use to contact us. They're broadcasting on Imperial Standard channels, but, sir, they're using encryption protocols that should be impossible for them to know." "Explain." "The encryption methods they're employing are current Imperial military standards updated within the last 10 years. Either they have access to current Imperial communication protocols or what, Doctor? Or they've been monitoring Imperial transmissions for an extended period and have developed the capability to decrypt our communications in real time. The implications hit everyone on the bridge simultaneously. If the humans had been monitoring Imperial communications, they would have access to decades or even centuries of strategic intelligence. They would know fleet positions, tactical doctrines, technological capabilities, and operational procedures. "Sir," Sensor Operator Keth called out with barely controlled urgency, "I'm detecting new energy signatures from the human installations. Multiple weapon systems are powering up across their defensive network." On the display, the human weapons platforms began showing increased energy activity. The readings suggested power levels that rivaled or exceeded those of Imperial battle stations. More disturbing still, the platforms were coordinating their power-up sequence in a way that suggested integrated command and control. They're not just individual weapons, Vexehe realized aloud. They're components of a unified defensive system. The communication channel crackled back to life, and Admiral Chen's voice filled the bridge. "Commander Vexehe, we're detecting increased sensor activity from your vessel. We interpret this as potential preparation for hostile action. You have 60 seconds to signal your intentions before we implement defensive protocols." "Defensive protocols?" Rent whispered. "What could be defensive about weapons that can vaporize asteroids?" Vexehe made a decision that went against every instinct developed during his military career. Open channel to the human admiral. When the connection was established, he spoke with as much dignity as he could maintain.
"Admiral Chen, this is Commander Vexehe.
Require clarification of your territorial claims." The Empire was not aware that this system had achieved sovereign status. "Commander, the Sol system has been under human sovereignty for over 2 centuries. We have made no claims beyond our home system, but we consider any uninvited military vessels within our space to be potential threats to our civilian population. I understand your position, Admiral. However, I have a duty to report this situation to Imperial Command. What assurances can you provide regarding the safety of Imperial vessels in this region?" There was a pause before Chen responded, and when she did, her tone carried a note of something that might have been sympathy. "Commander, we have no desire for conflict with the Draknari Empire. We are prepared to coexist peacefully with any power that respects our sovereignty. However, any attempt to subjugate or occupy human space will be met with total resistance. And if the Empire chooses to assert its traditional authority over this region, then the Empire will learn what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object." His duty was clear: report the situation to Imperial Command and request sufficient forces to establish dominance over the system. But his tactical experience suggested that such action might result in losses beyond anything the Empire had ever experienced. "Admiral Chen, I am prepared to discuss terms for peaceful passage through your system." "We would be willing to negotiate such an arrangement, Commander. However, any agreement would need to include recognition of human territorial sovereignty and establishment of formal diplomatic protocols." The words hung in space between them. The Empire had never negotiated with species it considered primitive. The entire structure of imperial authority was built on the assumption of overwhelming superiority that made negotiation unnecessary. "Sir," whispered Communications Officer Zeph, "if we agree to negotiate, we would be implicitly accepting their claim to equal status." Imperial Command would. Vexehe held up a scaled hand for silence. He understood the political implications as clearly as anyone, but he also understood that he was facing a situation that Imperial doctrine had never contemplated. "Admiral Chen," he said finally, "I am not authorized to negotiate on behalf of the Empire. However, I am willing to serve as an intermediary to facilitate communication between human leadership and appropriate Imperial authorities." "That would be acceptable, Commander. We suggest you withdraw to a safe distance while such communications take place. We will provide you with coordinates for a neutral meeting area outside our defensive perimeter." Vexehe looked around his Bridget crew members who were still processing the reality of their situation. For the first time in Imperial history, one of their ships was being escorted away from a primitive world by the planet's own defenders. "Very well, Admiral. Transmit the coordinates." As the human coordinates reached his navigation station, Vexay gave the orders that would change the course of galactic history. Navigation, set course for the provided coordinates. Communications, prepare a priority transmission to Sector Command. Classification, immediate Imperial attention required. As the Eternal Dominion began its withdrawal from human space, escorted by vessels that had demonstrated their ability to destroy it if necessary, Vex-High began composing the report that would inform the Empire that its 10,000 years of unchallenged dominance had just come to an end. The message he would send was simple and devastating. Have encountered advanced hostile species claiming territorial sovereignty in Sector 7739. Species designation, humans. Military capabilities exceed current Imperial assessment. Recommend immediate strategic review and possible fleet repositioning. Traditional subjugation protocols inadvisable. Request instructions. What he didn't yet know was that his message would reach an empire already dealing with the first stirrings of rebellion in conquered territories, facing resource shortages from overextension, and commanded by leaders who had never learned to deal with anything other than total victory. The Empire's response to news of human resistance would be swift, overwhelming, and exactly what humanity had spent 2 centuries preparing to defeat. Supreme Commander Thekvar of the Draknari Imperial Fleet read Commander Bexishai's report for the 3rd time, his clawed fingers tapping an agitated rhythm against the command throne of his flagship, the Galactic Supremacy. Around him, the vast bridge of the 5-kilometer-long dreadnought hummed with the controlled activity of a fleet preparing for war. Analysis confirms the report's authenticity, he asked his intelligence chief, a scarred veteran named Korvax who had served the Empire for over 40 years. Yes, Supreme Commander. Commander Vex-High's credentials are verified, and the technical data from his ship's sensors has been analyzed by our best scientists. The humans appear to possess military technology that significantly exceeds our previous estimates. Thekvar studied the holographic display showing the human solar system. The defensive installations that Vexai had documented were impressive, but the Supreme Commander had spent his entire career conquering species that thought themselves militarily superior to the Empire. Every advanced civilization made the same mistake. They assumed their technology would be sufficient to resist Imperial authority. Fleet status? 7th Battle Fleet is assembled and ready for deployment, reported Fleet Admiral Zenthos from her position at the tactical station. 87 heavy capital ships, 346 support vessels, total crew complement of 400,000. Estimated transit time to the human system, 18 days. The 7th Battle Fleet represented one of the Empire's premier military formations capable of sterilizing entire sectors if necessary. It had never failed to achieve complete victory in any engagement. The force was more than sufficient to crush any resistance the humans might offer regardless of their apparent technological advantages. Intelligence assessment of human capabilities? Thekvar requested. Korvax consulted his data tablets with the thoroughness that had made him the Empire's most trusted analyst. The humans appear to have achieved antimatter weaponization and possibly quantum communication technology. Their defensive installations suggest sophisticated tactical planning and coordination capabilities. However, Supreme Commander, our analysis indicates several critical weaknesses. Proceed. First, their fleet consists of fewer than 50 vessels, regardless of individual capability. Second, their defensive network is concentrated around their home system, suggesting limited strategic depth. Third, their technology appears focused on defensive operations rather than power projection capabilities. Thekvar nodded thoughtfully. These were exactly the kinds of limitations that Imperial strategy was designed to exploit. Advanced defensive technology meant little when faced with the overwhelming numbers and strategic flexibility that the Empire could bring to bear. Recommended approach? Fleet Admiral Zentos stepped forward, her combat experience evident in every confident movement. Standard overwhelming force doctrine, Supreme Commander. We approach the system in full battle formation, demand immediate surrender, and demonstrate Imperial power through systematic destruction of their defensive installations. Once their military capabilities are neutralized, we implement standard occupation protocols. It was the approach that had worked for 10,000 years across countless star systems. No species, regardless of their individual technological advantages, had ever successfully resisted the combined might of an Imperial battle fleet. The sheer scale of Imperial military power inevitably overwhelmed any localized defensive advantages. Time frame for complete subjugation? Conservative estimate, 72 hours from initial engagement to complete system control, Xenthos replied. The humans may possess advanced weapons, but they lack the numbers and strategic depth necessary for sustained resistance against a full Imperial assault. The Kvar considered the proposal. The Empire was currently dealing with minor rebellions in 3 different sectors, and a quick, decisive victory over the humans would send a clear message to any other species considering resistance. More importantly, if the humans truly possessed advanced antimatter technology, that knowledge would significantly enhance Imperial military capabilities once it was captured and analyzed. Authorization granted, he decided. The 7th Battle Fleet will depart for the human system within 6 hours. Rules of engagement demand immediate surrender, demonstrate overwhelming force if necessary, but preserve sufficient human technical personnel for technology transfer operations. As the bridge crew began implementing his orders, Thekvar allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The humans had managed to surprise one isolated patrol vessel, but they were about to face the full might of the Draknari Empire. Whatever technological advantages they possessed would soon become Imperial assets. What Supreme Commander Thekvar didn't know was that his every communication had been intercepted and decoded by human intelligence operations that had been monitoring Imperial transmissions for over 2 centuries. Admiral Sarah Chen was reading translated transcripts of his orders less than an hour after they were transmitted. 87 capital ships, she said to her assembled command staff in the war room deep beneath Luna Station. 400,000 personnel, estimated arrival in 18 days. The human leadership absorbed this information with the calm professionalism of people who had been planning for exactly this scenario for their entire careers. Colonel Zhang consulted his tactical displays before speaking. Fleet composition analysis suggests they're bringing approximately 12 times the firepower we demonstrated as effective against their survey vessel. Standard Imperial doctrine for overwhelming force scenarios, which means they're approaching this as a conventional military engagement, added Captain Torres from Strategic Planning. They expect to win through superior numbers and firepower, which plays directly into our tactical advantages. Dr. Redfern looked up from his intelligence analysis tablets. Admiral, the Imperial communication intercepts show they're planning to preserve human technical personnel for technology transfer. They intend to capture and exploit our antimatter research. Chen smiled grimly. The Empire's predictability continued to be their greatest weakness. Then we need to ensure they understand the full scope of what they're attempting to capture. Signal all deep space monitoring stations. Implement Protocol Omega. It's time to show them what humanity has really been building out here. Across the solar system, installations that had remained dormant for decades began powering up. Hidden within the asteroid belt, massive weapons platforms that dwarf the defensive installations around Earth began revealing themselves. The outer planets, which Imperial intelligence had dismissed as uninhabited gas giants, suddenly showed massive energy signatures as orbital installations that had been carefully concealed for centuries activated their systems. Most significantly, at the very edge of the solar system, construction yards that had been building humanity's secret weapons for over 50 years began launching their final products. These were not the defensive vessels that had confronted Commander Vexkai, but massive capital ships designed specifically to engage and destroy Imperial fleets. Status report on the new fleet? Chen requested. Fleet Admiral Morrison, recently promoted to command the new vessels, consulted his operational displays. 16 super dreadnoughts fully operational and ready for deployment. Each vessel mounting 12 antimatter projectors, quantum entanglement communication arrays, and the new gravitational field generators. Total crew complement, 40,800. The gravitational field generators represented humanity's greatest technological achievement, developed through decades of research into exotic physics that the Empire had never explored. The weapons could create localized gravitational anomalies capable of crushing Imperial ships or deflecting their plasma weapons with devastating effectiveness.
Deployment timeline? The fleet can be positioned for optimal engagement in 14 days, Admiral.
The Imperial force will find themselves facing defensive capabilities they have no ability to analyze or counter. Chen studied the strategic displays showing the full scope of human military preparation. The Empire was approaching the Sol system expecting to face a primitive species with some advanced defensive weapons. Instead, they would encounter a civilization that had spent 2 centuries developing military technology specifically designed to destroy Imperial fleets. "Gentlemen and ladies," she said to her command staff, "we are about to provide the Draknari Empire with a comprehensive education in the consequences of underestimating humanity. The Empire has conquered thousands of species through overwhelming force and technological superiority. They are about to discover what happens when they encounter a species that has had time to prepare." She activated the system-wide communication network that connected every human installation from Earth's surface to the outermost monitoring stations. Her words would reach every human soul in the solar system. "Citizens of Earth and the Solar Federation, this is Admiral Chen. The Draknari Empire has dispatched a major fleet to subjugate humanity and claim our technology for their own use. They believe that our advanced defenses are the extent of our capabilities. They are about to learn otherwise. For over 2 centuries, we have known this day would come. We have used that time to build not just defenses, but a military force capable of defeating any threat the galaxy can send against us. The Empire approaches our system with confidence born of 10,000 years of unchallenged victory. They will leave with the knowledge that humanity cannot be conquered, cannot be subjugated, and cannot be underestimated. In 18 days, we will demonstrate to the galaxy that the age of imperial dominance is ending and the age of human independence is about to begin. Every soul in our system, every man and woman who has worked to build our defenses, every person who has sacrificed to prepare for this moment, your time has come. We will show the galaxy that humanity stands ready to take its place among the free species of the universe." As her words echoed through habitats and installations across the solar system, Admiral Chen returned her attention to the tactical displays. The next 18 days would be humanity's final preparation period. When the Imperial fleet arrived, they would face not just advanced human technology, but the concentrated fury of a species that had refused to accept subjugation and had spent centuries preparing to prove their refusal with overwhelming force. The Empire was about to learn what happened when an unstoppable force met a truly immovable object. Supreme Commander Thekvar stood on the bridge of the galactic supremacy as his fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the human solar system. Behind him, 86 additional capital ships materialized from the distortion of hyperspace, their massive hulls gleaming with the power and authority of the Draknari Empire. It was a sight that had brought terror and submission to countless species across the galaxy. "Fleet status report," he commanded, his voice carrying the confidence of a commander who had never known defeat. "All vessels operational and in perfect formation, Supreme Commander," reported Fleet Admiral Zenthos. "Sensors are conducting initial system scans. We should have complete tactical intelligence within minutes." As the sensor data began flowing to his tactical displays, Thekvar felt the first stirring of uncertainty. The human system showed energy signatures that far exceeded what Commander Vexa Hay had reported. More troubling still, those signatures were distributed throughout the entire solar system, not just concentrated around the inner planets. "Analysis?" he demanded. Zenthos worked frantically at her displays, trying to process sensor data that challenged every assumption about human capabilities. "Sir, we're detecting massive installations throughout the system. The asteroid belt appears to be heavily militarized, and there are significant energy sources around all the major planets. Define massive installations. Some of the structures rival our largest battle stations in scales, Supreme Commander. And, sir, we're detecting mobile contacts approaching our position." On the main display, the first human vessels became visible as they accelerated toward the Imperial fleet. But these were not the small defensive ships that had confronted Commander Vexahai. These were massive capital ships, each one comparable in size to Imperial dreadnoughts, moving with the controlled precision of a mature space navy. Fleet composition of approaching forces. Initial count shows 16 major vessels, Supreme Commander. Configuration unknown, but they're moving in formation and appear to be maintaining combat-ready status. Tekvar studied the approaching human fleet with growing disbelief. In 18 days, the humans had somehow produced a battle fleet of unprecedented capability. Either Imperial intelligence had grossly underestimated human industrial capacity, or something else was happening that challenged fundamental assumptions about technological development. "Communication incoming from the human fleet," reported the communications officer. "Put it through." Admiral Chen's voice filled the bridge with calm authority. "Supreme Commander Thekvar of the Draknari Empire, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Defense Force. You have entered sovereign human space with what appears to be an invasion fleet. You will withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The words carried an authority that shocked every Imperial officer on the bridge. No primitive species had ever addressed the Empire with such casual confidence, let alone issued ultimatums to a full battle fleet. "Admiral Chen," Thekvar replied, "you are addressing the Supreme Commander of the 7th Battle Fleet of the Draknari Empire. You will stand down your vessels immediately and prepare to receive Imperial occupation forces. Any resistance will result in the complete destruction of your civilization. Supreme Commander, you are welcome to attempt Imperial occupation of human space. However, I should inform you that we have been preparing for this encounter for over 2 centuries. Your fleet's approach, composition, and tactical doctrine were known to us before you departed your base. We are fully prepared for whatever the Empire chooses to send against us." The communication channel closed, leaving the Imperial bridge in stunned silence. "She's bluffing," Fleet Admiral Zenthos said, though her voice carried little conviction. No primitive species could have obtained detailed intelligence about Imperial fleet operations. "Sir," the sensor officer called out urgently, "I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the human system. Every installation, every platform, every vessel is powering up weapon systems simultaneously." On the tactical display, the scope of human preparation became terrifyingly clear. The entire solar system had been converted into a unified military installation. Weapons platforms in the asteroid belt were revealing themselves, their energy signatures indicating firepower that rivaled Imperial battle stations. The outer planets hosted defensive installations that were beginning to coordinate their targeting systems. Even the space around Earth showed defensive networks of unprecedented sophistication. "Total count of human weapons systems?" Thekvar asked grimly. "Conservative estimate, over 3,000 individual weapons platforms, ranging from destroyer class to super dreadnought equivalents. Sir, they've militarized their entire star system." The implications were staggering. The humans hadn't just built a defensive fleet. They had converted their home system into the most heavily fortified position the Empire had ever encountered. Every approach vector, every tactical advantage that Imperial doctrine relied upon had been anticipated and countered. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving data transmissions from the human fleet. They appear to be sending us technical specifications." "Specifications for what?" "Their weapon systems, sir. Complete technical readouts including power output, range, and accuracy ratings." Thekvar felt a chill of recognition. Species that were confident in their military superiority sometimes shared technical data as a form of psychological warfare. It was the ultimate expression of confidence. "Here is exactly what we're going to use to destroy you. Display the data." What appeared on his tactical screens challenged everything he thought he knew about weapons technology. The human antimatter projectors showed energy outputs that exceeded Imperial plasma cannons by orders of magnitude. Their gravitational field generators represented physics that Imperial science couldn't even understand. Most disturbing of all, their defensive systems showed capabilities that would make traditional Imperial tactics not just ineffective but suicidal. Sir, Fleet Admiral Zenthos whispered, if these specifications are accurate, our fleet is severely outmatched. A single human super dreadnought appears capable of engaging multiple Imperial capital ships simultaneously. And they have 16 of them, added the tactical officer grimly. The communication channel reopened, and Admiral Chen's voice returned. Supreme Commander, you now have complete technical data on human military capabilities. As you can see, we have spent 2 centuries developing weapons and defenses specifically designed to counter Imperial technology. You have one opportunity to withdraw your fleet peacefully. After that, we will demonstrate why no species in the galaxy should ever underestimate humanity. Thedvar looked around his bridge at officers who had never faced anything but inevitable victory. The Empire's entire military doctrine was built on the assumption of overwhelming technological and numerical superiority. When faced with an enemy that possessed superior technology and had prepared specifically to counter Imperial advantages, traditional doctrine offered no solutions. Options, he asked his command staff. We could attempt to withdraw and request additional forces, suggested the navigation officer. A coordinated assault by multiple battle fleets might overwhelm their defenses through sheer numbers. Or, Fleet Admiral Zenthos said grimly, we could accept that we're facing something unprecedented and attempt to negotiate. The humans seemed willing to discuss terms. The words hung in space between them. In 10,000 years of Imperial expansion, no fleet commander had ever faced the choice between retreat and negotiation when confronting a primitive species. Both options represented fundamental challenges to Imperial authority and doctrine. Sir, the sensor officer called out with barely controlled panic, the human fleet is assuming attack formation. Multiple weapon systems are targeting our vessels. On the display, the 16 human super dreadnoughts had spread into a formation that provided optimal firing angles while maintaining mutual support. More ominously, the weapons platforms throughout the solar system were demonstrating their ability to coordinate targeting across vast distances, creating overlapping fields of fire that would make any Imperial tactical approach a death trap. Supreme Commander, Admiral Chen's voice returned. You have 60 seconds to signal your intentions. Withdraw, negotiate, or face the consequences of attempting to subjugate humanity. Thikvar realized that he was facing the most critical decision in Imperial history. His choice in the next few seconds would determine whether the Empire's expansion continued or whether they had finally encountered a species that would end their reign of galactic dominance. Open channel to the human admiral, he commanded. When the connection was established, he spoke words that no Imperial commander had ever spoken to a primitive species. Admiral Chen, I am authorized to discuss terms for peaceful resolution of this encounter. We suggest your fleet withdraw to a safe distance while diplomatic protocols are established. We are prepared to negotiate a non-aggression agreement that recognizes human territorial sovereignty and establishes formal diplomatic relations between our species. As Thekvar gave the orders for his fleet to withdraw, he understood that he was not just ending an engagement, he was ending an era. The Draknari Empire had finally encountered a species that could not be conquered, could not be underestimated. The age of Imperial dominance was ending, and the age of human independence had begun. 3 months later, the Treaty of Sol would establish humanity as the first species in galactic history to achieve independence through successful resistance to Imperial expansion. The agreement would recognize human territorial sovereignty, establish formal diplomatic relations, and most importantly, provide a model for other species seeking freedom from Imperial rule. Within a decade, the Draknari Empire would be facing rebellions throughout their territory as conquered species demanded the same independence that humanity had achieved. The empire that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years would find itself struggling to maintain control over territories that had witnessed human defiance and realized that Imperial dominance was not inevitable. The border signal that the empire had overlooked had indeed shaken everything. Humanity had not just defended their home system, they had demonstrated to the entire galaxy that freedom was possible, that resistance could succeed, and that no empire, no matter how powerful, could rule forever over species that refused to kneel. The galaxy would never be the same. The empire overlooked the border signal. The aftermath shook everything. Best HFY Stories.